It's fitting that Dragon Ball, the series that would be both love letter and swan song to 70s style action manga, would also write the book on anime taste for decades to come. I don't think I'm able to say anything about Dragon Ball as a series that hasn't been said better by other people and a decade sooner. Hence, I think it may be better to focus on Dragon Ball Z's place in the pop cultural anime zeitgeist. While Shonen Jump had a long legacy to choose from of almost 40 years, among these practically infinite choices, Dragon Ball Z was the only one that had to be in its Western adaptation. In modern Jump times, we usually have a handful of series claiming the top spot that changes periodically, but at the time of Dragon Ball's localization, it was the end-all be-all of anime. Heck, when Funimation decided to dub the remaining Frieza arc, it was literally advertised as the second coming. With Pokemon's hype dying down and realigning itself to be less of a universal pop cultural presence to being a staple of toy and game stores, the audience that had loved Ash and Pikachu venturing through Kanto as children were growing into adolescence. This created a need for material with greater narrative and thematic structure. While some of this did exist in Sunrise's colossal push to make Gundam a thing in the West, this need was ultimately met by Dragon Ball Z. In many ways, it's effectively become a thesis statement for what anime mostly is in the West. Dragon Ball is a fighting series with unmatched spectacle that can be easily compared to professional wrestling. Still, instead of being a coalition of characters and bouts, it usually becomes a all-out brawl against a one-man army that will eventually wind down into a one-man army into another one-man army. These massive machismo spectacles would be so large in terms of narrative and so long relative to their cartoon peers that they would be called sagas. This series would also put into a younger anime zeitgeist and community characters and relationships that are never incredibly complex, but still incredibly satisfying to watch over the course of several years. Maybe not as satisfying for the human cast, but this is all tied up into a neat package that a second grader could understand. That said, Dragon Ball's popularity in the West wasn't just a quality from it being good or unique from its peers, but also it's accessible. On the manga end, it led the charge for manga floppies, along with Ranma 1/2 and Pokemon, which is why it's episode 1 of Jump Works. Not because it's number 1 and that it is the best series, but because I'm going in terms of chronological publication date, and Dragon Ball Z would be first by about 5 years, actually predating the magazine, as Dragon Ball Z would have launched in early 1998 for the manga. However, it's not just being available in comic book stores that made it accessible, but being in public television. History is full of a practically infinite number of anime series, and in the Western world, the series that come up the most as historical landmarks are ones that are in front of the most eyeballs. And not only was Dragon Ball on one of the most popular children's television stations, but Dragon Ball would also run for several years beforehand, like Sailor Moon before it, and would entirely ditch the relatively steep barrier of entry that other 90s gyms would end up having in needing to have cable or a VHS player, or even buying the VHSs to begin with. Anime was on TV in front of millions of faces, and that was a game changer. Pokemon and years earlier, Sailor Moon, and the occasional blockbuster trip had primed a market ready to consume anime, and specifically media that is more challenging than Pokemon could offer. Still, for more challenging media, Dragon Ball, or rather Turner Broadcasting, was having a mostly hands-off approach in letting its employees curate what aired on Cartoon Network, and they were all too happy to oblige for a long-running action show, unlike anything else that had ever aired up until that point. With all the familiar themes that anime tend to have, like believing in yourself and such, but with a certain amount of weird charm and spectacle that Dragon Ball would have all of the familiar themes that anime would have, like believing in yourself, but also carried a certain amount of charm to it. Sure, Bruce Lee is cool, but could Bruce Lee blow up a planet? And if he did, would it be told in a format that is nothing short of a literal saga? As sagas are generally what Dragon Ball Z arcs would be marketed as. And while iconic bits like Namek generally only take place over a few days, fun fact, Namek takes place over Christmas, these arcs would go on so long that comparing them to an epic work of literature would basically be comparable. And Dragon Ball as a series, even ignoring the first 16 volumes to attract Goku from being a young adult all the way up to being a grandfather. And most shonen series are relatively skeptical to let their characters age more than a year or two, let alone be in the spotlight for so long that their progeny are being trained to take the helm multiple times, regardless of how short-lived those attempts may be. None of this is new or revolutionary. Plenty of sports series have improvement by blood, sweat, and tears as a motif, and plenty of other series have built off of Dragon Ball. And even before Dragon Ball's fame in the West, JoJo, going from 1800s to the modern day, would make Dragon Ball's roughly 30-year continuity blush. But I suppose this could be a case of you never forget your first. And in the West, Dragon Ball was the most popular series, and it introduced people to long-term, ongoing drama-style anime. And for a lot of people, the hype of Dragon Ball would be a dragon that they would chase for the rest of their anime-watching lives. It's pretty common knowledge, but we can go over it again. The original Dragon Ball was just known as Dragon Ball. Much like how Naruto never changed its name to Naruto Shippuden halfway through, Dragon Ball was just always known as Dragon Ball. But given that there was an anime that was mostly calling the shots in terms of what was marketable, Dragon Ball Z Volume 1 was in reality Volume 17 of Dragon Ball, and this was likely the path of least resistance for a young Viz media. The practice would be dropped for later series like Naruto that would likewise have an iconic breaking point, but that's a story for another episode of Jump Works. We've talked about this a lot, mostly in terms of the anime, and that's largely because we are looking at a landscape where manga is a tool for selling anime instead of vice versa as it is in Japan. We are looking at a point in time where the manga industry is in its infancy, and at the moment it is still more or less being incubated by the anime industry, or at the very least more than it typically is. But at this point in time, in the context of Shonen Jump in 2003, the crown that would sit squarely upon the head of future Pirate King Monkey D. Luffy would, for the better part of a decade, belong to the low-class Saiyan that was sent to Earth. And speaking of decade-lasting ramifications that you can still see the effects of to this day, I think it's fair to say that Dragon Ball carried early Shonen Jump, and to this day is still a pretty considerable workhorse in the comic book world. With both its single and tankobon and omnibus version, it can be consumed in a huge variety of ways, including tankobon, omnibus, and colored versions. In addition, it happens to be a very easy pitch for those who are already familiar with the material but need to be sold on manga as a concept, and has the additional appeal of not having any of that nasty filler, as Dragon Ball as a manga is relatively straight to the point with little to expand upon, especially the Cell arc. That was the one arc that ran in the Shonen Jump magazine and was probably the arc that provided the best number of twists and turns per few chapters. In addition to this, Dragon Ball is a long series. Of the starting Shonen Jump lineup, it was the only one that never had to worry about running out of manga. So early Shonen Jump was more than happy to dramatically pump its page count, and who wouldn't want their star player to come up to bat more often, knowing full well that it would take at least a decade at its current rate of running to run out of material. However, all good things do come to an end, and Dragon Ball Z eventually did leave the pages of Shonen Jump to wrap up its run as tankobon issues. One ongoing thread for early Shonen Jump Works is going to be marketing. Not marketing in terms of viral ads or campaigns or anything of that nature, even though that did happen, but in terms of being able to say, oh, I know that name, and hoping that your knowledge of that name would be a big enough motivation to check this thing out. For example, of the initial lineup of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Sandland, and One Piece, only 2 of them didn't actively have anime running in the West at the time. Viz and Shueisha were both rubbing their hands together, blissfully unaware it would actually be another 5 years before One Piece would be taken even slightly seriously, despite the dubbing process already being underway. And Sandland was a little bit of a wild card in that it's a short series, but it did have the ability to ride on the coattails of having the tagline, "Made by the creator of Dragon Ball Z." But that will be another topic for an upcoming episode of Jump Works. So while most of these series did have an anime that would eventually be popular on TV, or already were popular, appropriately it would be Dragon Ball Z, using its superhuman strength, or popularity in this case, to carry manga for a whole decade. Even after its prime, it would remain an evergreen cash cow for manga selections worldwide. Next time on Shonen Jump Works, the gamers rise up.
闇の扉が開かれた。